March the 3rd, 1942. 6:12 a.m. Over the Java Sea northeast of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The early morning light is thin and grey, stretched across the ocean like a fragile sheet of steel. Below, the sea is calm enough to reflect the first glow of dawn, but above it, the air is already alive with vibration. Aircraft engines churn through the silence in tight formation, their sound rolling outward like distant thunder that refuses to fade. Inside the cockpit of a battered Brewster F-2A, Buffalo Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke grips the control stick with gloved hands. The cockpit shakes with every uneven pulse of the radial engine, a machine already considered outdated by nearly every air staff that matters. The instrument panel is simple, almost crude compared to newer fighters being deployed elsewhere in the Pacific. Oil temperature fluctuates. The airspeed indicator trembles slightly, as if uncertain about its own reading. Van Dyke hears the radio crackle. Red section, maintain altitude at 3,000. Enemy contact unlikely before 700 hours. The voice belongs to Squadron Leader Hendrik Voss, calm, almost dismissive. There is no urgency in it, only routine. The kind of tone used when a mission is considered more formality than danger. Below them, the coastline of Java stretches like a dark bruise against the sea. Smoke from earlier raids still lingers inland. Airfields, fuel depots, supply lines already tested by days of relentless pressure from advancing Japanese forces. Yet this morning there is an unusual confidence in the Allied formation. Intelligence reports suggested enemy fighters were overstretched fuel, limited coordination slipping under operational strain. The Buffalo formation is small, too small. Only 6 aircraft remain serviceable from the original squadron. Maintenance crews had worked through the night just to keep them airborne. Canvas patches cover worn panels. Engine cowlings show oil stains that no one bothers to hide anymore. And yet there is a shared belief among some of the pilots. Not hope, not fear. Something closer to dismissal of the enemy. They've been pushing too hard. One pilot had said just hours earlier on the tarmac, lighting a cigarette with hands that barely shook. Even the Japanese can't keep this pace forever, no one argued. On the ground crew, Sergeant Willem Smit had shrugged while tightening bolts on Van Dyke's landing gear. Just bring it back in one piece, Lieutenant. This crate wasn't built for miracles. That word hangs in the air now. Miracles. Van Dyke glances at his wingman off to the right. Another Buffalo, slightly trailing its paint, faded and patched. The pilot gives a brief wing waggle, casual, almost amused. It feels less like a combat formation and more like a routine patrol over friendly territory. At this moment, no one believes disaster is minutes away. Far to the north, beyond the curvature of the sea, Japanese carrier groups have already launched reconnaissance sweeps. Their pilots are disciplined, precise flying machines that outclass the Buffaloes in speed, climb rate, and armament. Intelligence officers on both sides know this imbalance well. It has become a quiet assumption of the war in the region the Buffalo is obsolete, a transitional machine left behind by rapid technological evolution. Even Allied command has accepted it, but it is still flying. And sometimes, that is all that matters. Maintain radio silence unless engaged. Squadron Leader Voss orders again. Engaged. The word feels distant, theoretical, as if it belongs to another war somewhere else. Van Dyke adjusts his throttle slightly. The engine responds with a rough growl vibrating through the seat frame and into his spine. Sweat collects under his flight cap despite the early hour. The cockpit is already warm, the tropical air refusing to cool even at altitude. He thinks briefly of the engineers who designed this aircraft years ago. They had believed in it once. They had called it modern, capable, reliable. Words that now feel almost ironic. A faint glint appears ahead. Van Dyke narrows his eyes. At first it could be anything. Sunlight reflecting off the sea. A distant ship. A trick of atmospheric haze. Then the formation shifts slightly and the glint multiplies. Too many points of light. Too organized. His grip tightens almost instinctively. Red 2, do you see that ahead? He calls over the radio. A pause. Then the reply, calm but uncertain. Negative visual confirmation yet. Could be fishing traffic. Fishing traffic. Even as it is said, it sounds wrong. The shapes begin to resolve. Aircraft. Fast, forming in loose but confident clusters descending from altitude with controlled aggression. Their silhouettes are unmistakable to anyone who has been briefed properly. But briefing slides do not prepare the body for the reality of them. The enemy fighters are climbing into position with ease that makes the Allied pilots instinctively adjust their throttle as if trying to match an unseen standard. Squadron leader. Voss finally speaks again, but his tone has changed. Enemy aircraft spotted. All units prepare to engage. Hold formation. A silence follows. The kind of silence that is not empty but full of unspoken reassessment. Van Dyke watches the incoming formation grow larger. He notices something immediately. They are climbing faster, turning cleaner, moving with a confidence that suggests absolute superiority in energy and positioning. And yet, something else is happening. They are spreading wider than expected. Too wide for a coordinated strike. Too confident to fear resistance. The first enemy aircraft tips its wing, slightly sunlight flashing across its fuselage. Even at this distance, Van Dyke can feel the imbalance. It is not just technical, it is psychological. These pilots are not approaching cautiously. They are approaching as if the outcome has already been decided. In his cockpit, the Buffalo suddenly feels smaller. Not obsolete in theory, obsolete in presence. The radio crackles once more sharper now. All sections prepare for interception. No one breaks formation, but formation already feels fragile. Ahead, the sky is no longer empty. It is filling with the certainty of impact. And somewhere in that rising tension, Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke realizes something no one has said aloud yet. They were never meant to meet this early. March 3rd, 1942. 6:18 a.m. Over the Java Sea northeast of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies, east. The first warning does not come as a shout or an alarm. It arrives as a change in engine pitch, subtle enough that only pilots who have lived inside their machines long enough can notice it. Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke feels it through the control stick before he hears anything over the radio. A faint instability in the airframe as the Buffalo adjusts to slight turbulence, as if the atmosphere itself has become uneven. Ahead, the enemy formation tightens, then loosens again, a behavior that makes no tactical sense. Squadron leader Hendrik Voss breaks radio silence, his voice now clipped. Confirm visual identification. Report types immediately. Van Dyke squints into the growing light. The enemy aircraft are now clearly visible. Sleek silhouettes, radial engines, sharp wing lines that reflect the morning sun with a confidence that feels almost arrogant. Mitsubishi. A 6M0 fighters. Machines that Allied intelligence had already begun whispering about in reports that rarely reached frontline pilots in full detail. Fast, highly maneuverable, long range, lethal in trained hands. But even as recognition forms, something else bothers Van Dyke. Their approach is not fully coordinated. It is controlled, yes, but not strict, as if the formation itself is confident enough to relax discipline. Zero's confirmed one pilot reports his voice tighter than before. A pause follows. Then another voice, quieter. There are more than expected. No one responds to that. Instead, squadron leader Voss issues the order that always follows recognition. Hold course. Do not break. We engage head-on. Head-on! Van Dyke feels the weight of that decision settle in his chest. The Buffalo is not designed for this kind of engagement. It was already outdated in performance reviews months ago. Slower climb rate, inferior acceleration, heavier control response at high speed. Every pilot in the squadron knows these facts. They have all read the same reports. They have all listened to the same briefings where instructors carefully avoided saying the word inferior too loudly. And yet, here they are, moving directly into the enemy's advantage. Below them, the sea remains unchanged. Calm, indifferent, a flat mirror reflecting a sky that is about to become violent. The enemy formation begins its descent. At first, it looks like hesitation, a slight dip in altitude, then another, then a coordinated drop that transforms the entire formation into a descending wave. Van Dyke realizes something that tightens his throat. They are not preparing for a chaotic dogfight. They are preparing for controlled destruction. Break altitude slightly. Voss orders. Force them into engagement range. But even as the command is given, it feels outdated. Like trying to correct a problem that has already moved beyond correction. The first enemy aircraft dives. It passes through the sunlight with terrifying precision. Its speed increases rapidly, and for a moment, Van Dyke sees the pilot clearly inside the cockpit. Helmeted head steady, hands calm, no visible hesitation. The buffalo formation reacts late. Too late. Tracer fire erupts from the lead Japanese fighter. Bright, almost elegant streams of light, cutting through air that suddenly feels too thin to resist them. A burst of gunfire tears across the sky. Red 3, evasive maneuver, someone shouts. But Red 3 is already turning too slowly. The buffalo reacts like a heavy animal forced into sudden motion. Its control surfaces strain against airflow, the engine whining as it tries to compensate for a speed envelope it was never designed to handle in combat. Van Dyke watches as Red 3's aircraft shudders. A burst of impact. Metal fragments scatter into the air. The buffalo rolls slightly, then drops. Not explosively, not dramatically. Just a sudden loss of authority over the sky. It begins to fall. No parachute yet. No radio transmission. Just disappearance. Red 3 is down. Voss says, voice flat. But there is no time to process it, because the enemy is already pulling up, and already turning back in. The second warning comes from distance perception. Van Dyke realizes the Zeros are not committing fully to any single target. They strike, disengage, and reposition with an efficiency that makes Allied formation response feel sluggish in comparison. Each Buffalo pilot is forced into reactive motion, never offensive initiative. The sky is no longer a shared battlefield. It is segmented, controlled, dismantled piece by piece. Van Dyke pulls hard on the stick as an enemy fighter crosses his left side. He fires a short burst. Tracers streak forward, but the distance is slightly off. The enemy aircraft tilts effortlessly, slipping away from the fire like it was never there. Too agile, too light, too aware of its own advantage. Stop chasing individually. Voss orders urgently now. Stay together. Stay together. But cohesion is already weakening. Another buffalo breaks formation, instinctively chasing a target that lures it deeper into enemy space. The mistake is immediate. Two Japanese fighters converge from above and behind, coordinating without visible radio chatter. A burst of fire, another explosion of fragments. The buffalo disintegrates into smoke and falling debris. Van Dyke feels something shift inside his perception of the fight. This is not equal combat. It is demonstration. The enemy is testing reactions, not struggling against them. And still something unexpected happens. One buffalo manages a sharp climbing turn that briefly surprises a Japanese pilot. A burst of fire misses. The enemy overshoots. For a moment, there is a gap in the formation. A brief opening. Van Dyke sees it. And more importantly so, does squadron leader Voss. Now Voss calls sharply. Focus fire on lead pair. All guns. The buffaloes converge for the first coordinated response. For a moment, it looks like the situation might stabilize. Tracer fire converges on a single zero. The enemy pilot reacts, but slightly too late. The rounds connect. The aircraft jerks violently, trailing smoke. A hit, not fatal, but enough to shift momentum for a fraction of time. And in that fraction, doubt enters the Japanese formation for the first time. A slight widening of spacing. A recalibration of confidence. Van Dyke notices it instantly. Not victory, not even balance, but hesitation. And in this war, hesitation is rare enough to feel like a warning of something worse to come. Because the buffalo is still here, still flying, still reacting. And for the first time that morning, the enemy is forced to acknowledge that dismissal alone may not be enough. March 3rd, 1942. 6:24 a.m. Over the Java Sea northeast of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The smoke from the first downed aircraft has not yet dispersed when the second wave of contact begins. It does not arrive as a clean formation change or a formal escalation. It arrives as fragmentation. Small clusters of Japanese Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters peeling away from the main engagement zone, probing the buffalo formation with surgical intent. Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke feels the air itself change again. Not physically, but psychologically. The enemy is no longer reacting to Allied movement. They are anticipating it. Red 2, stay on, my left, squadron leader. Hendrik Voss orders, his voice now stripped of earlier calm. Van Dyke glances left. His wingman is still there, but the spacing between them has widened without instruction. The formation is no longer tight. It is elastic, stretched by stress and reaction time. Below them, the Java Sea reflects the growing brightness of morning. A deceptive calm surface, hiding the violence unfolding above it. A new set of enemy aircraft enters from the east. Higher altitude, faster descent angle. Van Dyke recognizes the maneuver immediately, even without formal briefing language. It is not a chaotic dive. It is controlled energy conversion. The Japanese pilots are using altitude not just as advantage, but as currency. Every second of descent becomes speed. Every turn is preloaded with intention. Brake right, Voss commands suddenly. The Buffaloes respond unevenly. Too slow, too heavy, too late in some cases. The sky fractures into individual duels. Van Dyke pulls hard right as a Zero passes above him. The engine roars under strain. The Buffalo responds with resistance, as if the air itself is pushing back against the maneuver. He feels the aircraft shudder through the frame. Behind him, tracer fire cuts through empty space. Close, too close. He corrects again, forcing a shallow climb. The enemy aircraft follows, but something unexpected happens. The Zero does not immediately close distance. It holds slightly back, matching rather than overwhelming. Van Dyke notices this instantly. It is measuring him, not killing him, measuring. Enemy is probing, Voss says into the radio, almost to himself. They are testing response curves. The phrase means nothing in official doctrine, but every pilot understands it instinctively. The enemy is no longer committing fully. They are studying reaction times, roll rates, climb delays. Every Buffalo response is being mapped in real time. Another Buffalo attempts a vertical climb. A mistake. 2 Zeros immediately adjust. One follows upward. The other circles wide, predicting the exit path. The climbing Buffalo struggles. Engine strain becomes audible even through radio static. The aircraft loses speed rapidly. Van Dyke watches it stall at altitude, a brief moment of suspension. Then the descent begins. No explosion, no dramatic break apart, just loss of control. The Buffalo drops into the sea in a slow, helpless arc. Red 5 lost Voss confirms. But there is no emotional response now, only accounting. The battle has already moved beyond shock. It has entered analysis. Van Dyke fires again at a passing Zero. The burst is controlled. Short. Measured. The tracers pass behind the target. The enemy pilot does not even flinch. Instead, the Zero rolls slightly and disappears into a downward spiral, rejoining the fight from a different vector. They are no longer flying into danger. They are repositioning through it. The Buffalo formation is now split into 3 loose clusters. Communication is still active, but coordination is weakening. Radio transmissions overlap. Commands conflict. Reaction delays increase by seconds that feel longer than they are. Stay together, Voss repeats, but the order now feels like a memory of doctrine rather than a practical solution. A Japanese aircraft breaks through the center of the formation, not aggressively, efficiently. It moves between 2 Buffaloes, forcing both to adjust simultaneously. In doing so, it creates a forced separation. One Buffalo drifts left, the other right. The formation breaks without a direct attack being necessary. Van Dyke realizes what is happening. They are not being defeated by firepower alone. They are being dismantled by geometry. Another burst of fire erupts nearby. A Buffalo ahead of him takes hits to the wing root. The aircraft tilts violently. The pilot struggles to stabilize it, but the structural damage is immediate. The wing begins to vibrate under load. Control compromised. The pilot reports, voice tight. Then silence. The aircraft begins a slow, uncontrolled descent. Van Dyke sees something else now. A pattern forming in enemy behavior. The Zeros are not lingering after attacks. They strike, then reposition instantly. No wasted motion, no pursuit unless advantageous. Every movement is calculated to preserve energy advantage. And still, something does not fit the expectations of Allied intelligence. They are closer than reported, much closer. Enemy strength underestimated, Voss says suddenly, voice lower now. There are too many elements here for a single carrier group. No one responds. Because responding means acknowledging scale, and scale means consequence. Van Dyke banks left again as another Zero approaches head-on. For a moment, he considers firing early. Instead, he holds. The enemy does the same. Both aircraft pass within firing range without engagement. A shared hesitation. A mutual calculation. Then the Zero rolls upward and disappears into sun glare. Van Dyke exhales sharply. That was not avoidance. That was selection. They are choosing when to kill and when not to. The realization spreads quietly across the remaining Allied pilots. The enemy is no longer reacting unpredictably. They are executing structured control of the engagement space. Every Buffalo movement is being counted before completion. Voss breaks radio silence again. We cannot hold this pattern much longer. Prepare for regroup over secondary altitude. But regrouping implies structure, and structure is already breaking. Below, another Buffalo is hit during a turn. The pilot attempts recovery, but the aircraft loses lift symmetry. It spirals briefly before disappearing into cloud shadow and then ocean. Van Dyke feels the weight of each loss now differently. Not as isolated events, but as proof of a system collapsing in real time. The sky is no longer divided into sides. It is divided into advantage states, and the Buffaloes are consistently on the wrong side. Above him, the enemy formations tighten again. Not to attack, but to prepare. And that is when Van Dyke understands the most unsettling part of the encounter so far. This is not escalation. It is calibration. March 3rd, 1942. 6:31 a.m. Over the Java Sea northeast of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The air has changed again, but this time it is not the enemy that shifts first. It is the Allied formation itself struggling under the weight of accumulated losses and fractured coordination. What began as a patrol has become a scattered, uneven engagement space where every pilot is fighting a slightly different war. Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke feels it in the way his controls respond. The Buffalo is still flying, still responsive, but every movement now carries hesitation, as if the aircraft itself is absorbing the stress of what it has witnessed. Regroup at 3,000 feet. Squadron leader Hendrik Voss orders again, but his voice now carries a strain that was not there minutes ago. Van Dyke glances around. Regrouping is no longer possible in the way it was originally intended. Two Buffaloes are already separated by distance and altitude. One is trailing smoke. Another is missing entirely from visual contact. The formation that once held 6 aircraft now exists as fragments spread across a widening aerial battlefield. Above them, the Mitsubishi A-6M0s adjust again. They are not rushing, they are organizing. The difference is subtle but absolute. A group of 3 enemy fighters peels away from the main cluster and begins a shallow arc around the Allied position. Another pair climbs slightly, holding altitude advantage. A third pair descends just enough to threaten from below without committing. Van Dyke recognizes the structure forming in the sky. They are surrounding them, not in panic, in sequence. Enemy is establishing containment geometry. Voss says almost to himself now, they are trying to lock us in. Containment geometry. The phrase feels clinical, almost detached from the violence unfolding around it, but it describes exactly what Van Dyke sees. The Buffaloes are no longer engaged in a dogfight. They are inside a controlled space where enemy aircraft dictate entry points and exit routes. A burst of tracer fire cuts across Van Dyke's field of vision. He pulls hard left. The Buffalo responds, but the motion is sluggish compared to the enemy aircraft that just passed through his peripheral vision. The Zero that fired does not pursue. It simply repositions upward, maintaining pressure without overcommitting. Van Dyke feels something shift in his understanding of the enemy pilot. There is no urgency, only certainty. Red 2, check 6 Voss, calls. Van Dyke turns his head. Nothing immediately visible. Then he sees it. A Zero climbing slowly behind, and below his wingman, perfectly positioned to intercept the next predictable turn. The enemy pilot is not rushing. He is waiting for the exact moment the Buffalo will naturally expose itself during maneuver correction. Break left now, Van Dyke shouts. His wingman reacts instantly, but the timing is off by a fraction of a second. That fraction is enough. Tracer fire erupts. The Buffalo jolts violently as rounds strike the rear fuselage. It does not explode. It simply loses stability. The aircraft dips, recovers, then dips again. Still airborne, the wingman reports. Voice strained, but the tone says more than the words. He knows it is over. Van Dyke fires at the attacking Zero. The burst is closer this time. He sees the enemy aircraft jolt slightly, adjust, then continue climbing out of a range without panic. A minor correction. Nothing more. No retreat. No emotional response. Just adjustment. The sky feels less like a battlefield and more like a system being optimized in real time. Voss makes a decision. All remaining aircraft tighten formation. We push west toward cloud cover. Use terrain masking. Cloud cover. Van Dyke looks ahead. A distant band of cumulus clouds sits near the horizon, white and thick against the blue. It represents cover concealment, a chance to break visual tracking. But reaching it means crossing open space. And open space is exactly what the enemy controls best. Still, there is no alternative. Move, now Voss orders. The Buffaloes begin to reposition. Immediately, the enemy responds. Not with a full attack, with anticipation. The Zeros adjust altitude and spacing, cutting off direct flight paths to the clouds. They are not chasing, they are predicting. Every Allied movement toward escape is met with preemptive positioning. Van Dyke feels frustration rising for the first time. Not fear, not confusion, frustration. Because every instinct he uses has already been accounted for by the enemy. A sudden burst of fire flashes near his left wing. He reacts sharply, pulling into a defensive turn. The Buffalo strains under the load. The engine protests loudly. He holds the maneuver longer than he should, risking stall just to avoid the firing line. When he levels out, he sees something that unsettles him. The enemy pilot did not follow. He had already moved to where Van Dyke would end up. Predictive targeting, Voss mutters. They are reading our escape vectors. The Buffaloes are now forced into tighter formation, not by command, but by necessity. Distance has become dangerous. Isolation is fatal. But compression creates another problem. Predictability. The enemy tightens response patterns immediately. 3 Zeros converge from above. Another pair approaches from the side. The formation is now compressed into a controlled engagement pocket. And then it happens. A coordinated strike, not chaotic, synchronized. 2 Buffaloes are targeted simultaneously. One attempts evasive dive, the other climbs. Both movements are anticipated. One is intercepted mid-dive. The other is cut off during climb transition. Both aircraft are hit within seconds of each other. Neither recovers. Van Dyke feels the weight of a realization deepen. This is no longer a skirmish. It is structured elimination. We are losing altitude control of the engagement, Voss says, voice now quieter. They are dictating vertical space completely. Vertical space. That is the key. The Buffaloes still exist horizontally. They still maneuver, they still fire. But vertically they are constrained. Every climb is punished. Every dive is predicted. And the enemy is never where they are expected to be. Another Buffalo breaks formation again, attempting independent escape toward cloud cover. It gains speed quickly, but immediately 2 Zero adjusts trajectory. One cuts above, one below. The interception is clean. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The Buffalo disappears into smoke. Van Dyke stops firing for half a second, not out of fear, out of comprehension. They are not reacting faster. They are deciding earlier. Voss finally speaks again, but the tone has changed completely. Everyone, listen carefully. We are not in a dogfight. We are inside an execution envelope. Break pattern is no longer optional. The words land heavily. Execution envelope. Van Dyke looks around again. The sky that once felt open now feels divided into invisible boundaries. Every boundary controlled. Every movement accounted for. Every reaction already anticipated somewhere above them. And still, the Buffaloes fly, because there is nowhere else to go. Above them, the enemy formation tightens once more, not to attack, but to prepare the next phase. March 3rd, 1942. 6:38 a.m. Over the Java Sea, approaching cloud cover, west of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The clouds are closer now, towering columns of white and gray that promise concealment but also conceal danger within their own shifting density. Sunlight filters through them in broken shafts, turning the air into a fractured landscape of brightness and shadow. For a brief moment, it almost feels like escape. But Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke can feel it in the way the buffalo responds. Nothing about this feels like escape anymore. Maintain course. Do not scatter. Squadron leader. Hendrik Voss orders. His voice sharpened by exhaustion and something closer to disbelief than command authority. There are only 3 buffaloes still in tight contact with him. The rest are either damaged, separated, or no longer visible in the open sky. Each loss has not been dramatic in isolation. There were no single catastrophic moments that defined collapse. Instead, it has been continuous erosion like structural fatigue spreading through metal under repeated stress. Ahead, the enemy, Mitsubishi. A 6M0 shift again, but this time something is different. They are not immediately closing in. They are holding distance, observing, waiting. Van Dyke notices it first in their spacing. The Japanese fighters are no longer aggressively compressing the engagement area. Instead, they are widening their arcs, forming a loose perimeter around the remaining buffaloes and the approaching cloud line. It feels almost like permission to enter, and that realization is more disturbing than pursuit. Why are they not engaging? One pilot? Asks over the radio voice, tense. No one answers immediately. Because answering would require acknowledging the possibility that engagement is no longer necessary for them. Voss finally responds slower now. They are controlling tempo. Tempo. The word hangs in the cockpit like something unfamiliar. Not a tactic, not a maneuver. A rhythm imposed from above. Van Dyke watches as 1-0 climbs slightly silhouetted against the sun. Another dips into shadow. Their movement is coordinated but not urgent. They are positioning, not attacking. And in that positioning, something shifts in the Allied perception. The buffaloes are no longer being chased. They are being herded. Stay together. Voss repeats again, but the order feels thinner now, as if it is being repeated more out of necessity than belief. The first buffalo reaches the edge of the cloud layer. For a brief moment, it disappears into white mist, and nothing happens. No immediate pursuit. No sudden strike. That absence of action is what creates the turning point. Because every pilot expects violence to follow vulnerability. When it does not, the mind begins to question why. Van Dyke enters the cloud layer next. Visibility drops instantly. The world becomes muted, softened, reduced to shifting gray and white shapes. Engine noise becomes more dominant. Radio static increases. Orientation becomes uncertain. Inside the cloud formation dissolves. Even friendly proximity becomes difficult to maintain. Maintain radio contact, Voss orders, but his voice is now partially obscured by interference. Then something unexpected happens, a brief moment of silence. Not total silence, but absence of enemy presence. No tracer fire. No engine screams nearby. No sudden dives. Just cloud and engine and fragmented radio signals. For the first time since engagement began, the buffaloes are not under immediate attack. Van Dyke adjusts his throttle slightly, trying to stabilize altitude within the cloud layer. His instruments flicker slightly due to vibration and moisture. The aircraft feels isolated, cut off from visual confirmation of anything beyond a few meters. Red 2 report position, Voss calls. Van Dyke responds. Inside cloud layer. Stable. A pause. Then another voice distant. Red 4 also inside. No contact with enemy. Another pause. This is not safety. It is interruption, and interruption is dangerous in war because it allows thought to return. Outside the cloud layer, the Japanese fighters have stopped pressing forward. They remain at the perimeter, visible only as occasional shadows slipping through breaks in cloud density. They are not entering. Not yet. Van Dyke begins to understand why. They do not need to. The buffaloes are already separated, already disoriented. Already reduced to isolated elements inside a space that removes their biggest remaining advantage, which is mutual coordination. Voss senses it too. This is not retreat, he says slowly. They are segmenting us. Segmenting. The word is worse than containment. Containment implies pressure. Segmentation implies removal of unity. Van Dyke sees it now as he tries to relocate his wingman. There is no visual contact, only intermittent radio confirmations. Each pilot exists in the same cloud layer, but not in the same space. And above the clouds, the enemy remains coordinated, waiting for isolated targets to emerge. A sudden burst of radio static interrupts communication. Then a voice, short, panicked, contact. 2 zeros, breaking through cloud. The transmission cuts off mid-sentence. Silence follows. Van Dyke tightens his grip on the control stick. Outside visibility remains 0, but he knows what is happening. The enemy is entering the cloud layer selectively, not as a formation, but as individual hunters, one by one. Controlled entry, controlled extraction. Do not engage blindly. Voss warns, but the instruction is already too late for those who are separated. Another transmission breaks through. Engaging. I cannot see them clearly. They are on me. Then static. Then nothing. Van Dyke feels a cold clarity forming in his mind. The turning point is not victory or defeat. It is adaptation. The enemy has changed the environment from open engagement to controlled isolation. And in that environment, the buffalo is no longer a fighter in formation. It is a target waiting for identification. He checks altitude. He checks throttle. He listens. And above the engine noise, he hears something else faintly through the cloud. A distant engine sound. Closing. Measured. Not rushing. Just approaching. And for the first time that morning, Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke realizes the most dangerous truth of all. The enemy does not need to find them quickly anymore. They only need to find them once. March 3rd, 1942. 6:45 a.m. Inside cloud cover, west of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The cloud layer has become a sealed world of gray pressure and unstable silence. Inside it, Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke can no longer rely on sight formation discipline or even certainty of direction. Every instrument reading feels slightly detached from reality, as if the aircraft is no longer fully anchored to the world outside. The engine noise of the Buffalo is constant, but now it is accompanied by something new. Expectation. Because the enemy is inside the cloud, not everywhere, not in force, but somewhere, and that is enough. Red Section reports status immediately. Squadron leader Hendrik Voss calls over the radio. His voice is still controlled, but the control now feels deliberate rather than natural. Responses come in fragments. Red 2 holding. Red 4 unstable but airborne. Static. Then silence from Red 3's last known frequency. No confirmation of loss. No confirmation of survival. Only absence. Van Dyke adjusts his throttle slightly to maintain altitude. Moisture beads on the canopy, distorting what little visibility remains. The world outside is reduced to shifting brightness and vague motion like something seen through thick fabric. Then he hears it. A distant engine tone. Not loud, not fast, but deliberate. He turns his head instinctively. Nothing visible. Then a shadow passes through a thinner section of cloud off his left wing. A Mitsubishi. A 6M0. Close enough to confirm identity. Far enough to avoid immediate engagement. It does not fire. It simply passes. Van Dyke reacts late, bringing his Buffalo around. He fires a short burst into the cloud where the enemy disappeared. Traces vanish into gray mist without confirmation of impact. No return fire follows. That absence is more unsettling than attack. Enemy, inside cloud layer, confirmed, Van Dyke reports. Voss responds immediately. Do not chase. Hold position. We regroup when visibility clears, but regrouping assumes continuity. Continuity is already broken. Another voice cuts in tense and uneven. I just saw one pass above me. It didn't engage. It just moved through. Moved through. The phrase spreads through the remaining pilots like something infectious. The enemy is not hunting aggressively. They are navigating, using the cloud layer as a controlled environment. Van Dyke realizes something that tightens his chest. The Japanese pilots are not lost in the cloud. They are operating within it, not with certainty of vision, but with certainty of pattern. A sudden burst of radio interference cuts through. Then a brief transmission. Contact left. Too close. I cannot turn fast enough. The voice ends abruptly. No explosion is heard, only silence. Van Dyke checks his instruments again. Fuel is still adequate. Engine temperature stable. But none of that matters if the aircraft is isolated long enough to be identified and engaged individually. He makes a decision. Vos, I am climbing out of cloud layer. A pause. Then Vos responds slower than before. Negative. Stay in cover. We regroup here. But the instruction no longer feels aligned with reality. Van Dyke increases throttle. The Buffalo begins a slow climb. Cloud density thickens briefly, then begins to thin. Light returns in fragmented layers. The canopy clears in uneven patches, revealing glimpses of sky above. And then he sees it. Above the cloud layer, 3 zeros are circling, not rushing, positioning, waiting for emergence points. They are not searching blindly. They are anticipating exits. Van Dyke feels a cold realization settle in. The cloud is not protection. It is a trap with defined exits. Below, inside the cloud, another Buffalo calls out, "I am trying to climb. I cannot see clear exit. There are shadows everywhere." The transmission breaks into static. Van Dyke breaks through the top of the cloud layer. Sunlight hits the canopy suddenly sharp and blinding after the gray enclosure. And immediately, 1 zero adjusts. It was waiting exactly there. Not higher, not lower. At the precise exit trajectory, Van Dyke banks hard right engine straining under sudden load. The enemy follows but does not overshoot. Instead, it mirrors the maneuver, maintaining controlled distance. No firing yet. Just alignment. He fires a burst backward. The tracers pass beneath the zero. No reaction. The enemy continues tracking. Another zero joins from above, forming a 2-aircraft pursuit pattern. Van Dyke realizes he is no longer part of a formation. He is now an individual target in open air again. Below him, through gaps in cloud, he can still see fragments of buffaloes struggling to emerge. Some do not emerge at all. Vos's voice breaks through again, now urgent. "Anyone still inside cloud, climb immediately. Do not remain separated." But even as the order is given, it is already outdated, because separation has already occurred. Another Buffalo emerges from cloud too late. 2 zeros are already waiting. The interception is immediate. Short burst. Loss of control. Descent. Van Dyke tightens his grip again, but something has shifted in his perception. This is no longer confusion. This is structured recovery by the enemy. They are not reacting to Allied emergence. They are timing it. He looks ahead again. The sky is open now, clear above cloud, and fully controlled. Because every exit point is covered, every movement anticipated, every pilot individually accounted for. Vos speaks one final time over the frequency, and his voice now carries something heavier than command failure. It does not matter where we regroup. They are already waiting there. And in that moment, the shock is no longer about enemy capability. It is about understanding that every decision made so far has already been factored into the enemy's response, even escape, even survival. March 3rd, 1942, 6:53 a.m. Above the cloud layer west of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The sky is open again, but it no longer feels like freedom. It feels exposed. The bright morning light that once promised clarity now reveals everything at once. Every movement visible, every mistake amplified, every aircraft outlined against a sky that offers no concealment. Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke levels his Buffalo for a moment, trying to re-establish orientation. The horizon is steady, the sea far below a calm and indifferent blue. But what should have been a return to structure is instead a continuation of fragmentation. There are fewer Allied aircraft now, much fewer. Van Dyke counts what he can see. 2 Buffaloes nearby, one trailing smoke, another moving too cautiously, as if every maneuver is being rationed. Squadron leader. Hendrik Vos is still on frequency, but his voice is no longer issuing structured commands. It is attempting to maintain coherence in a system that no longer supports it. All remaining aircraft converge on my position. We will reform an exit engagement zone to the southwest. Exit. The word is now different. It no longer means tactical repositioning. It means survival. Van Dyke turns slightly toward Vos's position. The Buffalo responds sluggishly, engine vibration increasing under sustained strain. The aircraft feels heavier than it did earlier, as if the accumulated stress of combat has physically altered its performance. Then he sees them, above and slightly ahead. 3 Mitsubishi. A6M0s. They are not diving immediately. They are already positioned along the expected convergence path. Vos's location is being used as a focal point, a reference for interception geometry. Van Dyke understands instantly. The regroup order has been anticipated, not intercepted after execution. Anticipated before it. Voss, do not hold position, Van Dyke calls urgently, but Voss is already committed to the maneuver. We need to regroup or we will be eliminated individually. That statement would have been correct earlier. It is no longer correct now. The remaining buffaloes begin converging toward Voss's location. Distance compresses. Formation begins to reassemble, but it is not restoration. It is forced concentration into a predictable cluster. The Zeros respond immediately. They descend in controlled arcs. Not fast enough to be reckless. Not slow enough to lose timing. Van Dyke watches one enemy aircraft angle into position above the regrouping point. Another shifts laterally. The third holds altitude waiting. It is not an attack formation. It is a closure pattern. The buffaloes attempt to reform beneath it. For a brief moment, it looks like coordination might return. 3 Allied aircraft align loosely, attempting defensive spacing. Then the first Zero strikes. Not the center. The edge. A buffalo on the left side of the forming cluster takes the impact. Tracers cut into its wing root. The aircraft jerks violently, breaks formation, and drops out of alignment. The structure collapses immediately. Break off, Voss shouts. But breaking off now means scattering into already prepared intercept zones. Van Dyke pulls right instinctively. A Zero passes above him, too close for comfort, but does not fire. Instead, it continues forward, matching the movement of another buffalo that is now isolated. The enemy is no longer engaging formation. It is selecting individuals inside collapsing structure. Another Allied aircraft attempts a climb. A mistake born from desperation rather than strategy. 2 Zeros immediately adjust altitude and converge. One blocks upward path. One cuts off escape vector. The buffalo is forced into a spiral. Then, hit. No explosion, just loss of control. Descent begins. Van Dyke feels something inside him shift again. Not panic, not disbelief. Something more dangerous. Recognition without resistance. The original plan was simple. Maintain formation. Engage enemy. Regroup. Withdraw. But each step has been invalidated not by failure of execution, but by enemy anticipation. Voss's voice breaks again over the radio. We are not breaking through. Repeat. We are not breaking through. There is silence after that. Then another transmission fragmented. Fuel is still sufficient. We can attempt coastal return. Coastal return. It sounds reasonable. It also sounds irrelevant, because the enemy is already repositioning between them and the coast. Van Dyke checks his surroundings again. The sky is now a mapped space of enemy control. Not full occupation. Partial. Strategic. Every possible Allied direction of movement has at least one intercepting pair of Zeros already adjusting course. The buffaloes are not surrounded in a circle. They are surrounded in probability. Voss makes the final structured decision. All remaining aircraft split and run individually toward nearest cloud fragments. Do not attempt regroup. It is not a tactical order. It is acknowledgement. The formation no longer exists. Van Dyke hesitates for only a moment. Then he banks hard toward a distant cloud bank, breaking apart near the horizon. The buffalo responds with strain engine protesting under rapid maneuvering. Behind him, he hears another buffalo pilot attempt the same escape. Immediately, a Zero adjusts. No hesitation, no delay, just response. Van Dyke does not look back. He does not need to. He knows what happens when isolation meets preparation. The sky behind him fills with scattered movement. Not chaotic. Controlled fragmentation. Each Allied aircraft attempting independent escape is met by a prepositioned enemy response. The original plan is no longer collapsing. It is already collapsed. What remains is only the aftermath still in motion. Van Dyke pushes the throttle forward. And for the first time that morning, there is no illusion left of structure, hope, or formation. Only survival decisions made 1 second too late. March 3rd, 1942. 7:08 a.m. Low altitude over the Java Sea, approaching fragmented cloud bands west of Surabaya, Dutch East Indies. The sea below is brighter now, fully exposed under the strengthening morning sun. Every ripple of water is visible, every reflection sharp enough to feel like a warning. Above it, Lieutenant Eric Van Dyke pushes his battered Buffalo forward at low-altitude engines screaming under sustained throttle. There is no formation anymore, only distance, only separation, only survival paths chosen seconds apart. His radio crackles with fragments of voices that no longer form a coherent chain of command. Enemy. Off. Mais. 6. Cannot climb, they are already above. Fuel, pressure, dropping. Then, silence. Then, nothing. Van Dyke keeps his eyes forward, scanning the fragmented cloud bands ahead. They are thinner now, broken into drifting patches that offer only partial concealment. Not safety, just interruption of visibility. Behind him, somewhere beyond visual range, the Mitsubishi A-6M0s continue their methodical pursuit. Not rushing, not clustering. Each Allied aircraft that breaks away has already triggered a calculated response. The enemy no longer needs to search. They only need to follow pre-identified escape lines. Van Dyke realizes the brutal simplicity of it. Every decision he makes has already been predicted as one of a limited set of options. Left turn, right turn, climb, dive, cloud entry, coastal escape. Each path has a corresponding counter already in motion. He checks his fuel gauge. Still enough for return if uninterrupted. But there will be no uninterrupted path. A sudden movement flashes in his peripheral vision. A 0 appears briefly above cloud edge, then disappears again. It is not attacking immediately. It is pacing him, matching his speed, maintaining pressure without commitment. Testing, still testing, even now. Van Dyke banks slightly into a shallow descent, trying to use altitude change as concealment. The Buffalo responds, but sluggishly. The airframe vibrates more than it did earlier. Stress accumulation is visible not just in damage, but in behavior. The aircraft is no longer performing as it did at takeoff. It is tired. Or maybe it is just fully exposed. He breaks toward a small cloud fragment ahead. It is his only option. As he enters its edge, visibility drops again. Not complete cloud cover, just enough to distort sight lines. A partial shield. For a moment, he allows himself a single breath. Then, radio static erupts. A voice, distant, broken. 2 zeros diving into cloud ahead of me. I cannot escape. The transmission cuts off abruptly. Van Dyke does not respond. There is no structure left to respond within. He exits the small cloud fragment almost immediately. Staying inside is no longer viable. It offers concealment for seconds, but also isolates him from awareness of interception points. As he emerges, he sees the coast far in the distance. A thin line of land, the exit point, the return point. And above that direction, faint but unmistakable, 2 zeros already converging. They are not chasing him directly. They are positioning between him and the coast. Van Dyke adjusts course instantly, veering slightly inland to avoid direct intercept vector. The Buffalo strains under the turn. Engine sound deepens almost like a warning. The enemy responds immediately. 1 zero shifts upward, the other arcs wide. They are not blocking aggressively. They are shaping his movement. For the first time since engagement began, Van Dyke understands fully what he is facing. Not superior speed alone. Not superior maneuverability alone, but control of available space. Every direction is already partially owned. He glances briefly at his instruments. Everything still technically functional. Altitude stable. Fuel sufficient. Engine operational. And yet, none of it matters if no path remains open long enough to use it. A burst of tracer fire suddenly cuts across his left side. He reacts sharply, rolling right. The Buffalo responds, but not cleanly. The maneuver costs speed, costs altitude stability. The 0 does not overextend. It simply resets position. Waiting again, Van Dyke tightens his grip. He sees another Buffalo far below, and to the left attempting a low-altitude run toward cloud cover. 2 enemy aircraft immediately adjust downward. The interception is fast, efficient. The Allied aircraft disappears into smoke within seconds. No celebration, no excess movement, just removal. Van Dyke forces his attention forward again. Coastline closer now, but so is enemy presence. The final realization comes not as panic, but as clarity. Even if he reaches the coast, there is no guarantee of disengagement. The enemy is not bound to a single engagement zone. They are operating across transitions, anticipating exits as carefully as entries. His radio crackles one last time with Squadron Leader Voss's voice. Anyone still airborne, do not assume escape is available. Proceed only if gap is confirmed. I repeat, only if gap is confirmed. Then silence. Complete silence. Van Dyke looks forward at the narrowing sky corridor between Cloud C and enemy positioning. There is no confirmed gap, only probability under control. And still he flies. Because stopping is no longer an option, only continuation until the system decides the outcome. Behind him, the Zeros adjust one final time, aligning into positions that close the remaining escape geometry. Not rushing, not reacting. Preparing,